It was meant to be a moment of triumph. Tyrese, barely 17, walking in the footsteps of a legacy. The son of a self-made millionaire, traveling in the luxury that only wealth could provide. In that moment, nothing could have taken away his pride. Nothing could have prepared him for the moment he would be told to leave a seat that he had every right to occupy. The seat he sat in wasn't just any seat. It was a VIP seat, reserved for those with power, wealth, and influence. But when the flight attendant walked over to him, everything changed. "I'm sorry," they said. "This seat is reserved for someone else. You need to get up." He looked around, confused, wondering if this was some kind of mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. Not at all. This wasn't about a seat. It wasn't about a reservation. It was about something deeper, something no one expected. In that moment, the weight of his father's wealth, his achievements, the high expectations on his shoulders, they all became meaningless. The world saw something else, something he couldn't control. Tyrese stood up, expecting nothing more than a simple clarification. But what followed was anything but simple. No one had prepared him for what would come next. Before we go any further into this shocking story, if you're new to this channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from viewers around the world. The attendant's voice wasn't cold or harsh, but it didn't need to be. The words had already done their job, sending a clear message: you don't belong here. As he walked away, head slightly tilted, trying to understand what had just happened, he couldn't help but notice the quiet glances from other passengers, some of them whispering, others simply staring. It wasn't just a seat they were taking from him. It was his place, his standing, in a world where money and privilege were supposed to shield him from prejudice. But today, none of that mattered. But the true impact of that moment, of that single action, didn't hit him right away. It took hours, maybe days, for the full weight to sink in. Because what had just happened wasn't some isolated incident. It was part of a much larger reality. A reality where race, status, and the color of your skin determine whether or not you can sit where you choose. And for him, this wasn't just about getting a seat on an airplane. This was about being forced to confront a reality he thought he was above. As he sat there, something inside him shifted. He began to replay the moment over and over in his mind. Was it really because of the seat, or was it because of who he was? For a moment, Tyrese wondered if it was just a mistake. But no, it couldn't be, because nothing about this felt like a mistake. This was something else. But even as he sat there trying to process what had just happened, another part of him knew. The story wasn't over. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience to be brushed off. Something deeper had been exposed. And the question now was, how would the world respond to what had just occurred? The eyes of the other passengers, the people who witnessed this, it wasn't just his humiliation. It was everyone's silence that screamed louder than anything. Tyrese didn't know it yet, but this incident would become a catalyst for something much larger. It wasn't just his seat that had been taken. It was his place in a world he thought he had already conquered. And so it began. A moment that seemed small, insignificant even, would soon snowball into something that no one could ignore. And for him, there was no going back. It was just another day in what appeared to be the perfect life. Tyrese sat back in his seat, gazing out the window of the private lounge, lost in his thoughts. He didn't expect the world to recognize him as anything more than just another young CEO's son. He never thought he'd have to fight for something as simple as his seat. But little did he know, the quiet hum of the airport, the soft murmur of passengers in the lounge, it was all about to be shattered by a single moment. One word, one action, and what had been a simple trip, something every wealthy person might take for granted, would turn into an experience that would forever change him. A mistake, a misunderstanding, or something far deeper. The uncertainty hung in the air as he sat there, unaware that the next few seconds would tear apart the very fabric of his world. Then it happened. A flight attendant approached him with a polite smile, as if this was a routine interaction, as if he was simply another passenger. But this wasn't just any interaction. And this wasn't just any passenger. The words came out easily, almost rehearsed, with a tone that seemed to convey no sense of urgency or awareness of the gravity of the moment. "I'm sorry, but we need you to move. This seat is reserved for a VIP guest." He blinked, confused. It didn't make sense. Tyrese had booked this seat. This was his seat. He had every right to be there. He looked around, waiting for the attendant to explain more clearly. But instead of an explanation, he saw the same polite smile, a faint glimpse of discomfort in the attendant's eyes, and then a gesture toward a new seat across the room. A moment of disbelief passed over him. What was happening? Was this really happening? He glanced at the seat he had been occupying, and then at the crowd around him, his eyes falling upon a white passenger, neatly dressed, walking into the room. The attendant quickly motioned to the VIP seat, and within seconds, the other passenger settled into the very seat the young man had just been told to vacate. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. The message was clear. In that moment, it wasn't just a seat being taken from him. It was everything about him, everything his father had worked for, everything he had worked for being dismissed in one quick motion. He stood up. His legs felt heavy, like they were made of stone. He couldn't shake the feeling that everyone around him was looking, watching, waiting for him to react. But what could he do? He had never been put in a situation like this before. The anger bubbled up inside of him, but it wasn't just anger. It was confusion. How could this be happening? His family had worked so hard to build their legacy, to build their place in this world. And yet, here he was, being told to move, to make room for someone else, someone who hadn't earned this spot in the same way he had. As Tyrese walked toward the new seat they had directed him to, he felt the eyes of the other passengers on him. They weren't just looking, they were judging. Some avoided eye contact, pretending not to notice the injustice unfolding right in front of them. Others watched with quiet curiosity, perhaps wondering if they would ever be in a similar situation and how they would react. But no one said anything. No one did anything. It was as if the world had quietly agreed that this was just how things worked. The wealthy, the privileged, they had their place. And for someone like him, no matter the wealth, no matter the title, his place was always a step below. Tyrese sat down in the seat they had directed him to, but it wasn't just any seat. It was far away from where he had been. It was tucked in a corner near the back of the lounge. A seat that wasn't VIP. A seat that wasn't even close to the comfort and the respect he had once thought was his by right. He felt small. He tried to breathe, but the air around him seemed to close in. He thought about the journey ahead, the flight, the business meetings, the places he had to be. But none of that mattered now. All he could think of was what had just happened, what had been taken from him. He wanted to leave. He wanted to scream, to ask questions, to demand answers. But what could he say? What could he do? The truth was simple, but painful. There was no explanation that would ever make this moment right. There was no justification for what had just happened to him. Tyrese didn't know it yet, but this moment would stay with him. Not just for the rest of the day or the rest of the week, but for the rest of his life. He would remember the way he felt walking away from that VIP seat, the way he felt when no one said anything, when no one stood up for him. This wasn't just any teenager. At 17, he had already become the embodiment of his father's dream, a dream built from nothing. A dream that had been forged in the harsh streets, where survival was an art and wealth was something few could ever imagine. He wasn't just another spoiled heir. He was the son of a self-made millionaire, a man who had risen from the bottom, from the streets, to become one of the wealthiest men in the country. A man whose name was synonymous with hard work, resilience, and the promise of success for anyone willing to put in the effort. At 17, Tyrese had already shown signs of following in his father's footsteps. Smart, ambitious, and driven to succeed. He was poised to inherit not just a fortune, but a legacy. He had been groomed for greatness, respected and admired by many, and on the outside, he seemed like he had it all. He had grown up believing that wealth and status would shield him from the prejudice others faced. He had grown up being told that success didn't come easily, but it came to those who worked hard. His father's lessons had shaped him, made him think that no door would ever be closed to him, no matter where he came from or what he looked like. His father had taught him that wealth, success, and respect were earned, not given. Those lessons were at the core of who he was. They were his foundation. But on this day, those lessons felt meaningless when the person who ordered him out of that VIP seat didn't see him as a young man with a legacy. They didn't see him as the son of a self-made millionaire. They didn't see him as anything at all. You've been given opportunities others could only dream of, son. But remember this: no one will ever hand you respect. You earn it. And you earn it through your actions, your work, and the way you carry yourself. Don't ever forget that. It wasn't just the physical discomfort of being asked to leave the VIP seat. It was the crushing realization that no matter how far his father's legacy had carried him, no matter how much wealth he stood to inherit, the world would always judge him by the color of his skin. That photo, that memory of his father, strong, confident, commanding respect wherever he went, became the standard by which the young man measured himself. But in the airport lounge, it felt like that legacy had been shattered in an instant. The power of his father's name, the wealth that had been passed down to him, suddenly, it felt irrelevant. And as the hours passed, the young man couldn't shake the feeling that the world, for all its promises of equality and fairness, was a place where he would always have to fight harder than others, simply because of who he was, simply because of the way he looked. This wasn't just about lessons learned and mistakes made. This was about something larger, something that would shape his future. Because in this moment, the young man realized that the world he was entering wasn't going to be kind to him. It wasn't going to treat him like his father, like a man who had earned his place. The silence was deafening. It wasn't the silence of ignorance. It was the silence of complicity. The kind of silence that comes from a society where people know what's wrong but choose to ignore it. Where they know the injustice taking place but are too afraid to speak up. The worst part of it all was that he knew this wouldn't be the last time. This wouldn't be the last time someone saw him as less than, as inferior, as undeserving of his place in the world. But what hurt the most was that for the first time in his life, he realized just how powerless he truly was. No matter how much his family had fought for their success, no matter how much his father had struggled, in the end, it was all meaningless when confronted with the weight of racial prejudice. In the days after the incident, the young man gathered his thoughts, his emotions, swirling in a storm of hurt and disbelief. He knew he couldn't just let this go. He couldn't let what had happened to him go unnoticed. He had to fight. He had to make sure that his voice was heard. He filed complaints with the airline. He shared his story with the media. He contacted lawyers, hoping for a breakthrough. But the response was not what he expected. No heartfelt apology, no swift resolution. What he received instead was a wall. A wall of indifference, corporate denials, and legal jargon designed to protect the company, not the victim. The public reaction was a mixed bag. Some rallied behind him, sharing their stories of discrimination, of the systems that have long been stacked against people of color. But for every voice of support, there was another filled with doubt, with accusations that he was overreacting, that perhaps he misunderstood the situation. But as the media storm grew, so did the strain on his family. His father, once a man who had built his empire from nothing, found himself in a position he never thought he would face, fighting for the dignity of his son in a world that seemed intent on taking it from him. The family's quest for justice became an exhausting journey, one that pulled them into an endless cycle of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and, most painfully, the growing realization that justice wasn't always something that could be easily obtained. The system wasn't designed to protect the powerless. It was designed to maintain the status quo. As weeks turned into months, the young man realized just how hard it was to break the chains of an unjust system. The airline issued a statement. They denied any wrongdoing, stating that the seating arrangement had been a mistake, a mere misunderstanding. And yet, as they downplayed the incident, the pain of that day only deepened in his heart. He felt trapped, as though the more he sought justice, the further it slipped from his grasp. And despite the evidence, despite the story he had shared with the world, his experience remained an untold story for most. But what the media and the public failed to see was the psychological toll this battle had on the young man. It wasn't just the disappointment of not being believed. It was the quiet exhaustion of trying to convince the world that his story mattered. This wasn't just about a seat. This wasn't just about an apology. This was about something much deeper. It was about a young man's fight to reclaim his dignity, to force the world to acknowledge him as a human being with worth beyond the color of his skin. The public conversation was heated. Some cheered him on, rallied behind him, seeing his fight as a symbol for all who had been marginalized, for all who had faced discrimination in silence. But there were others who couldn't, or wouldn't, see it that way. They labeled him a troublemaker, a kid who was using his position and privilege to stir up controversy where none existed. For them, it was simpler. Tyrese was no victim. He was a wealthy teenager with a bright future. How could a boy who had it all possibly understand the struggles of the real world? How could his experience be compared to the suffering of others who lived in poverty, who faced far worse every single day? As the story began to lose its traction in the media, many wondered whether real change was possible. Were these discussions, these fleeting moments of solidarity, just that, moments? Or was this the spark for something bigger, something that could reshape the future? Was this the moment society would stand up and take action, or would it slip back into complacency, as it always had? This incident, despite its painful reality, began to shape his future in ways he never expected. As his case gradually ends, so he turned every opportunities to speak about racial injustice, about inequality, and about the deep-rooted systems that perpetuate these biases. But with every new platform, every new opportunity to speak out came new challenges. He became a symbol, not just for the fight against discrimination, but for the fight against apathy, for the fight against a system that tried to brush his pain aside. The system that continued to refuse to confront the ugly truths lurking beneath its polished surface. But not everyone agreed with him. Not everyone saw this as a moment of reckoning. For some, the fight was already over. They had moved on. They had found another story to focus on, another crisis to address. They saw this incident as an isolated incident, nothing more. For them, racism was something that had already been dealt with, a thing of the past. But for others, this was just the beginning. The Tyrese's story sparked a fire in those who believed that the world had not changed enough, that the work was far from done. His story was the story of countless others who were ignored, overlooked, or silenced. And for them, the fight was only beginning. In the end, the question remains, did anything truly change? Did his fight, his painful journey, lead to real transformation, or was it just another fleeting chapter in the ongoing battle against injustice? For the young man, the fight wasn't about one moment in time. It was about making sure that his story, and the stories of so many others, would never be forgotten. One evening, Tyrese attended a networking event with people from his industry, people he had once admired and tried to impress. He spoke to some of the most influential figures in the room, but as the night wore on, he noticed that the usual conversations were happening around him behind his back. The small, disapproving glances returned, only this time, they were harder to ignore. But instead of retreating, something inside him shifted. This time, he didn't shy away from the conversations that made him uncomfortable. He confronted the subtle prejudices in the room. He wasn't confrontational, but his words were clear, and his voice was strong. He made them realize that racism doesn't only live in the blatant acts of hate we can easily identify. It lives in the quiet, insidious moments when we let the system of inequality go unchallenged. It lives in the spaces where politeness overrides honesty. That night, after the event, Tyrese felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope. It had been hard, confronting people he had once admired, challenging the same system that had kept him at arm's length for so long, but it had also felt liberating. For the first time, he understood that breaking the cycle wasn't just about fighting for himself. It was about fighting for everyone who had been silenced, overlooked, or diminished. His voice mattered, and so did theirs. As we conclude this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more true stories from the deepest parts of the human core. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. This story, like so many others, is a reminder of the ongoing fight for dignity, equality, and justice. It's a story of resilience and the strength to speak out in the face of adversity. We all have a role to play in making the world a better, more inclusive place. Let us know your thoughts. What do you think of this story? Have you experienced something similar? Share your stories in the comments below. The more we share, the more we begin to understand that we're not alone. Every voice matters in the fight against racism and injustice, and together, we can start to change the narrative. It's not a perfect world, but with each person who speaks out, each story shared, the world becomes a little less silent, a little less divided. And in those moments, hope begins to grow, not just for the young man, but for everyone who is still fighting to be seen for who they truly are. If you thought this story was powerful, wait until you hear the next one. Because the journey of racial justice, the struggle for dignity and equality, is ongoing. It's a story that continues in every corner of the world, in every small action, every word spoken, every protest, every conversation. It's a story that still needs to be told, and it's one that we all need to be a part of. Thank you for watching. Remember, every story shared brings us one step closer to understanding and healing. Let's keep this conversation going. What have you learned from this story? What is your story? Together, we can create a world where dignity is never questioned and equality is not a fight, it's a right.